Today we are talking about Anselm's ontological argument for the existence of God. In fact, the way I've said it is a little bit redundant since the word ontological means having to do with existence. We are moving forward in the history of philosophy over 1,000 years. Anselm lived in the 11th century. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. Some of you may be familiar with Anselm, perhaps even read some of his works. If you went to Catholic school, for instance, you would probably be familiar with him under the name Saint Anselm. Anyway, we're going to talk about this very complex and I think beautiful argument today. I guess maybe you have to study philosophy for a long time before you start seeing arguments as beautiful. But I think there's something absolutely beautiful about this argument. That is not to say that I think that the argument is successful. I'm not sure that it is. But it is a three-premise argument that appears on its surface to be deductive and valid, and its premises appear to be true. So it has the appearance of a sound argument. Anyway, in this first short video, we're just going to walk through the premises and the conclusion. We're just going to try to identify the parts of the argument. And in subsequent videos, we're going to break down the argument and look at objections to the argument, including the perfect island objection by this monk named Ganilo, and at Anselm's response. So, premise one of the ontological argument. It's a strange one. Premise one is a definition. And you should know the premises, by the way. Who knows when I might ask you for to reproduce these on, say, an exam, or to discuss these in, say, a discussion board. Premise one, God is defined as the greatest possible being. This is merely a definition, and I want to come back to this in a second after I introduce premise two. Premise two looks a lot like premise one, but it is its own unique and substantive premise, and it cannot be deduced from premise one. Premise two is God is a possible being. Now let's stop and talk about premises one and two. So, premise one is a definition, and it is customary to define one's terms, often as the premise in an argument. By defining a term that does not follow that that thing exists, or even that that thing is possible. I could define a Ralph as a round square, something that is both perfectly round and perfectly square at the same time. That's fine. I have the right to stipulate a definition. That's something I can do in philosophy. I can define my terms. Anselm has done that in premise one. He's defined what God is. That only seems responsible, actually. He thinks it's a very good definition. He thinks it's a definition, he says there, that even atheists would agree to. And I think it is a pretty good definition. But even if you don't agree, it seems fair that he be allowed to define his term, right? He's allowed to define what it is that he's talking about. Premise two is simply saying, hey, that thing that I that I just defined in premise one, it's possible. What I mean by that is logically possible. Let's talk about this for a moment. There are at least a couple different types of possibility. There's practical possibility and logical possibility. Um, it is practically impossible that I could run a 2-minute mile. No one ever has run a 2-minute mile. I certainly won't be the person to do it. It would violate the laws of nature for me to run a 2-minute mile. But it wouldn't be logically impossible. It wouldn't be a contradiction in terms. God could make me do it. It would be a miracle. That's what a miracle is, a violation of the laws of nature by God or some other deity, some other supernatural force, right? So what things are logically impossible? Well, bowling a 301 game. That's logically impossible. The best possible game is a 300. Getting a 17 in 18 holes of golf would be logically impossible. Even Thomas Aquinas and Anselm would say God himself could not do that. By the way, I will be using the masculine pronoun he to refer to God. That is for convenience sake and because the other authors that I'm referring to use that pronoun. I actually don't think that God is gendered, but anyway, just to explain. So let's see. A round square is logically impossible. Anselm gives us a test. He says, we can close our eyes and think about something. If we can close our eyes and imagine it, then it's logically possible. If we can close our eyes and we can't imagine it, then it's logically impossible. So close your eyes and try to imagine a round square, a shape that's both perfectly round and perfectly square at the same time. You can't do it. Well, that's because it's logically impossible. It's a contradiction in terms. But Anselm says, close your eyes and try to imagine God, that is the greatest possible being, a being that's great in every way, all powerful, all knowing, all good. We can imagine that. So all premise 2 is saying is that thing that I just defined is logically possible. It could be the case. That's where we are so far. One more premise, and he thinks he's going to prove the existence of God. Here we go. Premise 3. Existence and reality is a great-making quality. Therefore, God exists. Take a moment. See if you can piece together how in the world these 3 premises give us God exists. Well, look, if existence and reality is a great-making quality, that is to say, if something is greater if it exists in reality than if it merely exists in the understanding, and if God has all of the great-making qualities, then God must by necessity have that quality or property. Therefore, God exists. Unless, of course, he's not a possible being, but premise 2 says he is. So God, by definition, is the greatest possible being. He has all the great-making qualities. Strength, is that a great-making quality? Yes, it is. So God has it. How much of it? All of it. He's omnipotent. Knowledge, is that a great making quality? Yes, it is. So God has it. How much of it? All of it. He's omniscient. Moral goodness, is that a great making quality? Yes, it is. So God has it. How much of it? All of it. So he's omnibenevolent. And existing in reality, something that exists in reality is greater than if it merely existed in the imagination. Santa Claus, great, but Santa Claus that exists in reality, much greater, right? Something that exists in reality is greater than something that merely exists in the imagination. Therefore, since that is a great making quality, and God has all the great making qualities, then God must have that quality. Therefore, he exists. We're going to talk a lot more about this, but I want you to have something to chew on. So, armed with these premises and this conclusion, I'd like for you to go back and revisit your reading of Anselm's ontological argument. And I'll see you in the next video as we analyze this and as we start to consider objections, including Ganilo's perfect island objection. More soon.